to this video, and as you may notice that in class we sort of ran out of time and couldn't really finish our Excel worksheet. So in this video I aim to quickly go over the pivot table function in Excel so that everybody's on the same page and everybody understands pivot tables a little bit more better. So I'm going to go ahead and launch my Excel and open my Excel sheet that's posted on NYU classes, and what I'm going to do is go over my discrete worksheet. And what I notice is that I have a bunch of numbers which are tech scores of about 36 individuals. So what I want to do is calculate the frequency of each number and graph it. And there are a couple of ways to do it. The most tedious way is to manually report each individual entries and in the second column find their repeats and report however many times it repeats. But an easy way to do it in Excel is to use pivot tables. And depending on the version of Excel you're using, you may not have pivot table option in this ribbon. So what you can do is just go over to Help and search for pivot table, and it will guide you where to find it. So I'm going to go ahead, click pivot table, and it's going to ask me to select my range. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of my data, including the first cell that says tech score. And for this option, I'm going to choose existing worksheet. I'll click OK. So what you will notice is that you now have a dedicated space for your pivot table along with this dialog box. So head over to the dialog box and select tech score and drag it to rows. Now you can see that something has happened in your dedicated area. What happens is that Excel is basically looking at all of your range that you selected, which is my first column, and it's reporting all the unique entries in an ascending manner. So in this table, it's looking at my lowest value, which happens to be 1, and it's reporting that. Then it's reporting the second lowest value all the way to the highest value, which is also known as the maximum, and reporting it only one time. And just note that you cannot have repeats in this column, right? Because that's not the point of frequency table. For frequency table, we are actually reporting how many times each value is repeated for each individual entry in your data set, right? So you cannot have repeats. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is select my tech score again and drag it to the values column. And you will see a whole bunch of numbers will pop up. So what's happening is that Excel is looking at my first column, and wherever it finds 1, it's going to add them together and report the answer. Same thing here. It's going to find all the 2's in my range, or my first column or the column that I selected, and it's going to add all the 2's and report the answer. It's going to look for all the 3's, add them together, report the answer. But we do not want that, right? We want the count. We do not want the sum. So what you can do is head over and right click on this sum of tech score and go into field settings. And in this field settings, you'll see a whole bunch of functions. They work the same way, and we are interested in count, so I'm going to go ahead and select count and hit OK. Now, instead of the sums, it's reporting the actual frequency of each number. So it's telling me that 1 in this data set is repeating 2 times, 2 is repeating 10 times, so on and so forth. So this is a quick way to report or calculate the frequency of each data point by using pivot tables. So now what I'm going to do is select all of my data, head over to Insert, and in Excel 2016 I have this option called Recommended Charts. If you do not have that option, go over to the bar chart and select cluster column, and in recommended chart, if you have that option, it will give you as a recommended option as a preset. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that, and you will notice over here that for each individual data points, it's giving me its frequency, and it's also plotting it in terms of a bar chart. So I'm going to go ahead now and go in quick layout and select that layout. And what I like to do is right click on the bar charts and add data labels. So now it's easier to visualize the frequency for each data point. So it's again, one is reading 2 times, 2 10 times, 3 10 times, and so on and so forth. And please note that whenever you're plotting anything, make sure to label the axes and the actual table name. And you can do that by going over to the chart element and selecting the correct option. So hopefully now you understand how pivot tables work. So let's do it one more time. And another thing that I want to mention is that this data is discrete, right? It's not continuous. So it's for discrete data, it's okay to have gaps within each bar, right? But if we had continuous data, you should not have any gaps because it's continuous, right? So we're gonna see that in that example in effect for this continuous sheet. So go do the same thing. Go over to Insert, Pivot Table, select your range, existing worksheet, hit OK. You have the dedicated area now, along with this option, and select the scores, drag it to rows, select the scores, drag it to values. We do not want the sum, so right click it, go to field settings, change that to count. Now it's going to give me the count of each individual value in my data set. So I'm going to do the same thing, select all data points, go and insert recommended charts, and select the bar. And again, right click it and add data labels. Now it has all the frequencies. And again, please, label all the axes. So now, as you can see that this is continuous, so we should not have, any gaps within each bar. So we can change that by going to quick layout and selecting this option. And let's add border to it so that the bars are more visible. So I'm going to select solid line and change the color to black. Let's try one more time. Okay, so there we go. So for continuous data, the bar graphs should not have any gaps. So that's just one of the ways to plot the continuous, and this was for discrete. So now let's look at the grouped data. So before I get into this, I just want to show you something. So let's do it one more time. Select all the data, go and access existing worksheet. Okay, your dedicated slot is over there, and select score, rows, score to values, field settings, change it to count, hit OK, select all the data points, go to insert, chart, this bar. Now you can see it's getting very complicated, right? Once I plot all of those values, it is giving me the frequency, which is right. But as a human, it's very hard for us to interpret all of this information. So what we like to do is that if you have like a lot of measurements and you want to find the frequency, it's always a good option to group data together. And in order to group it, there are a couple of methods or ways you can do it. And one of the most common ways is to use the Sturgis approximation, which basically gives you the number of intervals that you should have at the very least for your given data set. And that's usually represented by k, and the formula of calculating k is 1 plus 3.322 times log base 10 of the number of values that you have. So let's go ahead and calculate k. So we have 1 plus 3.322 times log 10 of, I have a total of 100 entries, so I'm gonna put 100, yes, and it's giving me 7.6, which is, approximately 8. And range is obviously the maximum minus minimum, so we can use the max function, or since we have already calculated or created this pivot table, we can just use the last value, which is 66 minus 2, which is the minimum. And width of each interval would be it's given by r over k, so equals r, which is 64, divide that by k, so we're gonna end up with having a width of 8.372. And of course, we can round it up to either 8, or I basically like intervals of 5, so I'm gonna round it up to 10. Remember that Sturgis, it's only a guideline. You don't have to follow this number in exactly. Like you can always use or add more units to it and make it more intuitive. So what I'm gonna do is select my first cell in the pivot table, right click it, go into group and outline, and with group and outline I'm gonna have a couple of options. So I'm gonna go over and click on group, and this option basically selects automatically my minimum and the maximum, and we already, well, Excel by default put 10, which is very good. So Excel, it's the algorithm that it's using, it's accurate, and since because we also calculated the width and we approximated 10, so I'm just going to leave it along that. However, if you want to go back to 8 and round it down instead of rounding it up 2 units, you can also do that. So I'm going to leave it to 10 and hit OK. So now what I see here is that for all of my data points, I have all the data is grouped together in units of 10, right? So from 2 to 12 there are like 10 units, 22 to 32, 10 units, and so on and so forth. So now I can do the same thing, select my data, go to insert, recommended charts, hit the bar chart. And now instead of seeing that all those tedious bar graphs which are hard for us to interpret for all 100 values, now it's much easier, right? Everything is grouped together and we can look at the frequencies. So I'm just going to right click, add data labels, and we can see, so every single value that is within the range of 2 and 11 is repeating 15 times, and every single value within 12 and 21 is repeating 11 times, and so on and so forth. And again, it's very important to label your axis, so make sure that you guys do that. And another thing I want to show is that oftentimes you will also be asked to create a frequency polygon. And what a frequency polygon is, it's basically the same concept, and instead of you making a bar chart, you're making a polygon, which is one of the functions in Excel as well. So you can go into insert, and instead of choosing the bar, you can go into scatter and go into let's see this. No, that's not what I want. Okay, let's see. Insert chart. Okay, so it's scatter with straight line and markers. Right here. So if you go into the scatter option, you're going to see this option of scatter and straight line markers. Select that, and instead of a bar chart, now I have a scatter, which is pretty much the same thing. It's giving me the same information, but in a different format. And I can go ahead, right click it, add data labels, and now I can see that whatever the frequency of each data points in my data set. So hopefully this video give you a brief understanding of what pivot tables are and how you can use them. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And that will be the end of this video.